In Universal Century 0079, Earth's less fortunate and persecuted make their new home in space. A home where people are born and raised and die. Hello everyone and welcome to the Gunpla Network. I'm the Spicer and today's video is going to cover the news that Netflix is bringing the original Mobile Suit Gundam movie trilogy compilation, Char's Counterattack, and Hathaway's Flash to their streaming services internationally. If you haven't heard already, Netflix is adding the original Mobile Suit Gundam movie compilation trilogy and Char's Counterattack to their services in the US and UK on June 18th. So coming up pretty quickly, about a week from now-ish. This is pretty huge news, as no streaming service in the US currently offers the movie compilations or Char's Counterattack. Funimation does have the original 42-episode series up on their site, so if you'd like a jump start or see what the movie cuts out, you can definitely watch that. But in terms of the movies themselves, they aren't anywhere at least accessible in the US. Now, the only major difference between the original series and the movies really comes into the form of a more streamlined, slightly differently organized story, but it's all pretty much the same. And of course a shorter runtime for a trilogy versus 42 episodes. There's some slight animation improvement, but these came out like a year or two after the original series had ended, so it's not going to be night and day difference. It's still very, very similar. Now, seeing Gundam start to become more available in the West is really cool because really since Daisuke shut down back in 2017, no one service has had a lot. They've had a couple of things here and there. Hulu for a while had like 4 or 5 different things going on. But generally speaking, it was spread out across a bunch of different platforms. And while that's still kind of the case, more platforms are filling out their Gundam backlog, with Funimation and Netflix housing a lot of the English releases. Now, of course, anything that didn't get an English dub is kind of hard to come by here in the US, but maybe one day. It was also announced, though, that Hathaway's Flash will be exclusively streamed on Netflix internationally as of July 1st. This release is another big win for Western or just international Gundam fans in general. While things like the Unicorn OVAs had English dubs released alongside the Japanese, it is hard to find places to stream them or release the Unicorn OVAs when they first came out, so it is cool that it's coming to Netflix. It's very easily accessible, and fingers crossed it might get the Unicorn treatment and get a dub alongside the Japanese, so you can choose a sub or a dub. Now, outside of that news, that these iconic movies are coming to a streaming service potentially near you, I thought it'd be fun to share the top 5 reasons why the Gunpla Network as a whole thinks you should watch the original movie trilogy or the original series. This video is brought to you by our Teespring store. That's right, we have our own merch shop where you can get all your favorite Gunpla Network designs on a shirt, a mug, a sticker, or even a hoodie. We even have Network Chan over there on a hoodie, so well, it's hot in at least the US here. If you're in a cold country, sweaters are great. Otherwise, we've got t-shirts and we've got mugs, so if you want a hot or a cold drink, we've got you. Now, starting us off at number 5, we have probably the strangest on this list in the memes, honestly. Not only do you have the infamous Bright Slap, of course, but you have a bunch of just different weird animations that are really inconsistent and just funny looking. I mean, we have that still to today, but it was much more exaggerated back in the late 70s, early 80s. So you have a lot of material to work with. The original series, of course, is going to give you more of that, as not only is the movie compilation series shorter, of course it's only 3 movies, but it was also like slightly retouched in certain areas, so you're not going to have all of the same stuff, but generally speaking, a lot of the animation is very similar, so you're still going to get a lot of wonky stuff either way, and if that's just something that you find amusing, it's kind of a fun way to enjoy the way dated animation of the original Gundam series and kind of have some fun with it. The series is, of course, very serious in tone, but finding some of that just crazy looking animation is probably one of the funnest parts you can do in terms of enjoying that old style of animation. In number 4, we have a total of 180 in terms of tone, and we're talking about the story, of course. Now, the story itself is, the whole thing that started Gundam and spawned Real Robot. And even if you've looked at wiki pages and have a pretty good understanding of what Amuro and Char and the White Base went through, it's still wholly different watching it and seeing it. And, there's a lot of little things that come up that really the wiki does touch on, I suppose, but it is really different being able to see those kind of visceral reactions in some ways. Most notably, it's fairly early on, so it's not really a big spoiler. You might want to pause it for a couple of seconds or mute it if you don't want the spoiler, but when Ryu unfortunately passes, it is a really big hit to the White Base team, and we see that, then you really don't get that kind of emotion through reading the wiki. So the story is still very good, very touching, very relevant, and if you're not a fan of how Seed or anything else that's tried to readapt that style of story, going back to the original is a really solid idea. There's still some wonky parts, of course, but generally speaking, it is a really good story to follow through with. In number 3, we have kind of an extension of the story, oddly enough, in the way of Origins. The Origin OVAs actually make the original series better, in a way, so we have more context now as to how Char became Char than anyone did in the 70s or 80s, of course, other than the people making the content mostly. But this actually helps provide a lot more in terms of story that you wouldn't have had earlier. So you can see how Char started as a child, went up into being a young adult, and sure, there's probably some story inconsistencies here and there, but generally speaking, they would flow into each other fairly well. And even though there is a big difference in animation, having that double-sided story, kind of having Amuro's through line being the main one, of course, in the original series, and then seeing Char's through line starting with Origins and going through to the inevitable conclusion of Mobile Suit Gundam, gives you a story that it's very Gundam in a way. It does have a lot of those gray areas, and having a better understanding of why Char is the way he is just makes that more impactful. So if you've watched the Origin OVAs and you liked especially what Char is doing, because it's pretty much just this Char show, then jump into the movie compilations or the original series and see where he goes and see how his journey progresses. In number 2, we have tropes in things like unobtainium and Minovsky Physics, oddly enough being an actual thing on TV tropes. Now, of course, there's probably maybe some earlier examples of this, but in terms of robot and Real Robot, of course, there's not a whole lot earlier than Gundam in that vein. But generally speaking, what is Minovsky Physics? It's pretty much just the made-up science of how things work that pretty much just explains everything. So for Gundam, it's why you don't have super long-range battles, with Minovsky Physics pretty much breaking radar and things like that. You have to get somewhat closer for melee combat, which is why you see close combat mobile suits exist in Gundam. So some similar things are kind of the science of alchemy in Fullmetal Alchemist, a bunch of different technologies in Star Trek, Mass Effect, and then, oddly enough, Armored Core has the Kojima particles. So this is something that is carried through, and I'm sure, like I said, the base concept is probably earlier than this, but having the name of Minovsky Physics and really cementing that into the culture of media in general, I guess, because this spans anime, live-action TV, video games, is really important and impactful, and probably on par almost with starting Real Robot as a subgenre. Having that principle of giving some kind of generally fairly well explained science to explain away a lot of different problems is really unique, and especially was really unique in the late 70s, early 80s. And lastly, of course, it's part of anime history. I mean, it started the entire Real Robot subgenre. Before Gundam came out, I mean, Tomino directly did Daitarn 3, which is a very Super Robot show, and everything else was Super Robot. There wasn't an alternative. But then you have Gundam come out, cementing the fact that Real Robot exists and can be commercially successful when the movie compilation comes out. And then after that, you start seeing things pop up like Macross, which is probably, like, in terms of mecha, ongoing, long-running series, right there with Gundam in terms of its longevity and its success. And then way later down the line, you have, like, the whole renaissance, if you will, of Real Robot in, like, the 90s with Voltoms, and then you have Full Metal Panic in the 2000s, you have Code Geass, you have Eureka 7, I guess, to, like, a minor extent. But generally speaking, it really not only showed that people would like content like this, but that sponsors could make money off of stuff like this. And from a purely commercial perspective, that's super important, because if Bandai hadn't come in to sponsor Gundam after the original series was canceled, we would not have Gundam. So, you know, as much as the commercial part's not necessarily something we always enjoy with Gundam, it is incredibly important. And even if you're not a huge fan of the 70s animation, it just gives you perspective on the anime industry and how this subgenre has grown, seeing where it started and how it has grown since then. Of course, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, watching this video and my ramblings for about these 10 minutes here. And of course, if you have any comments or any questions, pop them in the comments below. I know I'm very excited for all of these things to be releasing. I mean, Char's Counterattack's a great movie. I've seen the original series, but not the movie compilations, so I'm really excited to see what gets fixed. I generally know kind of what's different, but in terms of viewing it, I haven't seen it. I do say the original series is still good, so if you have the time and you want to, like I said, it's over on Funimation, you can watch that now. And then, of course, Hathaway's Flash. I mean, this is a huge deal. If Bandai, Sunrise, I guess, are more accessible or more open to streaming, that brings a whole different ballgame to the world of Western and international Gundam fans, because, you know, as a person in the US, it is really easy to be like, oh, come on, bring it out here to the West, but, I mean, there are Gundam fans all over the world, right? Europe usually gets kind of the shaft in that one, unfortunately, but with things like this, it is really exciting to see that Bandai Sunrise are very open with bringing this kind of content out internationally and letting everybody see it. And if, you know, they partner with Netflix and we get more stuff, even if it's subs of like Turn A, I would be super into it. But anyway, that's just kind of my little thought there. In those comments below, let me know what you think. And of course, as always, friends, stay safe, keep building, and keep on watching.